Hi there, Dave here with the second video. This is about the Dave Crafty, the fake Crafty engine that we're going to take a look at so that we can understand how to use the real one by having a very simplistic version of it that will run the simplest of code, in fact the code that we've seen already. So if we go to the game engine site and we look at this code, this is the code that my little fake Crafty engine will run. But you'll be able to understand the interaction between this very simple game engine, fake game engine, and your code. And hopefully that will allow you to understand the relationship between Crafty, the real Crafty, and the code you're going to be writing. Alright, so in order to get to this guy, well, first we can see what it does. We go over to play examples, and it's right here at Fake Crafty. And so if we go over to Fake Crafty, this is all the code we're going to be taking a look at in just a couple of seconds. But we might as well see what it does. So what it does is it comes up and says init done, so it does that. And the init done, it does right after it did the crafty.init here. So we can take a look at that, see how that works. And then it comes up and it says player component names are equal to those. Its attributes are X is 100. You could put the other ones down, didn't. Color is blue and 4-way is 3. And that code ran right and at the end of the execution of where we make the player. And so that's all it does. And when we look at the code here, we see that there's 2 HTML files and 2 Crafty UI JavaScript. Okay, well the one here goes with the one here. I'm showing you a couple of different ways of writing the code that we're looking at on the website here. And one is done in this file, the other one's done in this file. They come out to be exactly the same. They're actually doing the same thing, just a different approach, and you can choose to do it however you wish. The first approach does it the way that the examples do, and that's cool. So there's all of the code for my fake game engine. And so this HTML file executes, does the code this way, and this one does it that way. All right, so I went over to the downloads folder, and it was there. So I'll go ahead and take a look at that. And yep, it's there. So I unzipped it, put it into that folder, and then opened it up inside of Carrot. And so here is the HTML that runs that code. What code am I talking about? Once again, we're talking about this code. This is what we're trying to run here. So inside of the HTML, looks pretty straightforward. We're using the jQuery, and instead of using the real Crafty engine, we're using fake Crafty JS. That's the one I wrote. And then we're going to use the first version of the user interface code. So I just called it UI1. So this is the code that interfaces with the page that the user sees. And the game engine is the fake Crafty JS. Okay, and you can see that there's no difference between the first one and the second, except the second one uses this UI. All right, so when we go ahead and take a look at the code, here it is. There's the window onload function. There's Crafty init. And there's where we make the player. So in this way of doing things, which is the way that all the examples work, is that we're making a player object out of the execution of the E method of the Crafty object. So we have some object called Crafty. Oh, where did that object come from? Well, we know that when we look at the HTML, it must have come from this fake Crafty engine. Yep, it's from the fake Crafty engine. So let's see where it came from. So here's the entire game engine. And down at the very bottom is where we define Crafty. All the stuff up at the top, these are all just functions. They never get executed until they're called. So they're just functions. The one at the top happens to be the primary guy, and he's called Crafty Dave. And he has the following members. He has an init. He's got an E, he's got an ATTR, he's got color and four-way. And so any instance, any object of type Crafty Dave will have these members. And now these members here, what they are in reality is here. Well, init is actually init, Crafty init. Well, what is that? Well, we have to look down below to see where that's defined. And it's defined to be a function. There it is right there. And so when I reference the function init for an instance of Crafty Dave, I'm going to actually be executing Crafty init. You have to stare at these for a while until you understand the relationships. But this is saying that Crafty Dave has got all these members, and here are the members. There's Crafty init, there's Crafty init, there's Crafty E, there's Crafty attribute, the ATTR, there's Crafty color, and Crafty four-way. And notice that each one of these returns an instance of the object. This returns an instance of the object that we're working on. It represents the current one of these things that the program is working on. And in fact, the one it's going to be working on is the only one that's going to exist, which is Crafty right here, which is we're defining it to be right here. This is the only piece of code that's executed inside of here. It's the only piece of code, and it creates the object known as Crafty. And notice that Crafty has a method called init, and it has a method called E, and it has something called attribute. And notice what each one of these methods does except init. Init just says, init done, and that's the message that you saw. That's how we presented that little box there with that init done. That's how that was done. And then we return this. So after the execution of Crafty init, we are going to return back, which means going to set on the left-hand side of the equal side of whoever called this thing, or it's going to be replaced, that part of the code that just got executed, with this value. So whatever just got executed will be replaced with this, which is an instance of the game of Crafty Dave. Or if it's on the right side of an equal sign, then whatever is the label, the name that's over on the left-hand side, will currently then point to whatever this guy is, which is an instance of Crafty Dave. So Crafty is an object of type Crafty Dave. And Crafty Dave includes these members. And here are what these members do. Look at the rest of them. What they do is they take comp names, they take whatever's being passed into them, and they save them as part of the current instance of the game, the Crafty Dave. So this E, which is, look, here's this E, we defined it as being a member of Crafty Dave up here, and we set its value to the value that's being passed in when we execute Crafty E. And Crafty E is executed when the user execute E. Where is that? Well, that over here, there's the Crafty init, there's the init that we just talked about, there's the execution of the Crafty E. There's Crafty E. There is the execution of the attribute function. There's the color, and there's the four-way. Now that's kind of confusing because it would look better if the code was written. It would look easier if the code was written a different way, maybe. I think this is easier for you to see, at least in the learning stage, which is this reason for the UI2. If we look at this, we see that we make the player first by executing the E method, which creates an entity, and that's known as player. Then to that player we execute the attr function, passing in another object. We're passing in another object that doesn't have a name, but it's got four property members, X, Y, W, and H. And the values are, so we're making an object inside of an object. So inside of the function attribute, we're passing an object that we're making real time. It's got four properties, X, Y, W, and H, and the values are associated right after the little colon guys, right? Okay. And so there is color, the color function being executed, passing in blue, so we remember blue, and there's four-way, so we remember the three. And after we've done the code, and this is the code, this is exactly the same code that we saw in the website. It's exactly the same code. Then what I do is I go ahead and I print the results of that. And that's the alert, that's that last message that we saw. And once again, if we wanted to see it, we could go back to the play examples and pick one. So what we're seeing is player, and then the component's name are those are the components. The attribute, well, at least one of them is X is 100. I could have put the rest of them out. There's color is blue and four-way is 3. Yep, those are the values. Those are the right values. So I got those by doing this. Saying, okay, the player comp name is equal to player.e. The attributes were stored in player.attr. The color was stored in player.color, player.four-way. So we have this object. Now, in the other way of doing things, we didn't have to repeat the word player, player, player 3 times. We didn't repeat the word player. What we did was instead we executed them one right after the other. We executed this one first. And since this returned the object when it went to execute the next method, which is the attribute method, it just used the object and it executed its attribute method, which is fine. And then when it got done with that, that whole thing was returned by this, by the object, right? By Crafty. And then we went ahead and executed the color. And then we went ahead and executed the four-way. And notice that as soon as we get done with that, then we've finished the entire execution. So this is a shorthand way of piggybacking methods. It only works if these functions always return the object that they're working on. So this is an easier way to see it. Make the object, then execute whatever functions you want on it. This code's the same, no matter how you do it. Right? That code's the same. So we've seen very, very simple implementation of the game engine all on one page, and how that game engine is used in a very simple way here. And hopefully that will help you understand the real deal. Take care.